Good afternoon, everybody. It is great to be with you today, and can I thank the EMA for hosting this event. And this, of course, officially kicks off the 2023 pre-budget season. So you're all here right at the beginning of the budget cycle. The decision to give this speech here in Auckland, though, was no accident. I said before that when Auckland, the engine of the economy, is doing well, the rest of the country will do well as well. And that's why meeting with Auckland businesses was one of the first things that I did as Prime Minister. The relationship with business is one of the ones that I've sought to develop in the 3 months that I've been in the job of Prime Minister. Just days after that first meeting, which was on my second day as Prime Minister, it started to rain rather heavily here in Auckland. And Auckland experienced the worst flooding in recent memory. That then was followed rapidly thereafter by Cyclone Gabrielle. For many of you, I'm sure, that meant these past couple of months have felt like one step forward and 2 steps backwards all too often. Just as we were making progress with our borders fully reopened after COVID-19, tourists were returning, the weather gods decided to deliver us the worst and wettest summer in decades. But one of the things that I love about New Zealand and New Zealanders, and also about Auckland and Aucklanders in particular, and what we see time and time again, is that Kiwis step up and they get on with the jobs that are at hand, despite the enormity of the challenges that they might be facing. Here in Auckland, I saw the community led by people like former All Blacks, Sir Michael Jones, Ronnie Clark, Officer To'onu. They were ensuring that families evacuated from flooded homes had a dry place to stay, food to eat, and the support that they needed. Businesses donated goods and people were taken care of. The community did what it does best and rallied together to support those who were most in need. So while in Auckland and the eastern parts of New Zealand have had it pretty tough over the last few months, you've also demonstrated your resilience time and time again. And I do want to acknowledge how difficult it's been, and it continues to be for many. But I also want to thank you. On a positive note, in recent weeks we've started to see some green shoots in our recovery, and I hope that that will start to rebuild some confidence. The number one message that I had at that first meeting when I met with business here in Auckland was the need for more skilled workers to help fill the skills gaps that we have in our economy. And the government listened to that. Over recent months, we've made a number of changes to our immigration settings that have put more jobs on the straight to residency pathway, that have boosted the number of working holiday places, that have attracted over 1,000 applicants to our special visa to assist with the cyclone recovery, and that has made the largest ever increase to seasonal RSE workers. A recent report from the OECD has ranked New Zealand as the #1 country for attracting highly skilled workers. We're also in the top 5 for attracting entrepreneurs. The OECD looks at a range of different measures, including quality of life, inclusiveness, the family environment, incomes, and tax. Balanced across all of those measures, New Zealand came out very well. When considering those sorts of results, I do worry that we sometimes talk ourselves down too much. New Zealand's incredible natural environment, our relative safety, and our easy way of life are a real tonic for those wanting to raise a family or to get out of the rat race overseas. We can and should be positive about our country and promoting those attributes to the world. Already, the changes that we've made, plus the positive views that migrants already have of New Zealand, is starting to show through in our immigration figures. In March, the number of arrivals on work visas exceeded pre-pandemic levels for the first time. It was also the most arrivals on work visas in the month of March since NB began collating that particular data series back in 2012. Our provisional annual net migration gain for the past 12 months of 52,000 is up there with pre-COVID-19 levels. And as Westpac's senior economist Michael Gordon has pointed out, if our net migration rate across the past 4 months was annualised, we'd be looking at net migration gains of around 100,000 people per year. Now, I know that many businesses are still facing worker shortages, and I'm not suggesting that the changes that we've made or the OECD's ranking means that the issue is now fixed. Overall numbers won't tell the experience of individual businesses, and we've got a long way to go to fix our chronic skills shortages, especially in areas like the health system. But you asked the government to take steps to attract more labour to New Zealand, and we have, and those actions are starting to work. The other issue that was at the forefront of those early conversations was, of course, inflation and the cost of living. I've made the cost of living one of my top priorities as Prime Minister. The reality is that the government previously was doing too much, too fast, and the effect of that is that we've been tied up on those issues taking up time and taking time and money away from where our focus needs to be. So you will have seen a range of reprioritisation that we have been doing as a government to make sure that we are focusing in on those issues that are the most important now. I want to be really clear. I acknowledge that times are pretty tough for a lot of New Zealanders right now. I get that and I hear that from my local community in the Hutt Valley. Family budgets are tight and a lot of people are now going without. It puts a lot of stress on families and on parents. And I know that businesses have been doing what they can to absorb increasing costs and not pass those on to their customers. And I know that that hasn't been easy, and I do think we probably haven't acknowledged that enough. So thank you for doing what you have been able to do to help mitigate some of those cost of living pressures. But with increasing input costs, supply chains that have been under pressure, and a very unstable global picture, there does come a point where businesses have no choice but to increase costs. Since becoming Prime Minister, I've made it my priority to support New Zealanders and to make sure the government is doing its bit to tackle inflation. Over the last 3 months, we've extended the fuel excise subsidy to keep petrol prices down. We've extended half-price public transport to provide cheaper transport choices. And we've increased support for those on superannuation and other government support and those who are earning the minimum wage. Of course, it's the primary job of the Reserve Bank to bring down inflation, and it will have been of a relief to many to see the drop in our headline inflation numbers to 6.7% last week, now lower than Australia, the UK and the average across the EU zone. It appears that we are now past the inflationary peak and inflation is trending down here and globally. We expect that that should continue and inflation should continue to fall domestically this year, although we also have to acknowledge that the impact of the cyclone rebuild could mean that the inflation number moves around a little bit on its trend downwards. For our part, the government is committed to reducing our proportion of spending to dampen demand within the economy. Overall, government spending as a proportion of GDP is declining. During the peak of our COVID-19 response, when we were supporting nearly half of all jobs in the country with the wage subsidy, spending increased to 34 to 35% of GDP. However, the Treasury has pointed out that between now and 2024, government spending is set to fall by the largest amount since at least 1987, due in part to the rapid rollback of all of that COVID-19 spending. So despite what you might hear in political circles, the fact is that government spending is actually trending down towards the low 30s as a percentage of GDP, and that's about where we intend for it to settle. Living within our means is an important economic goal for me and for the government. But getting to the level of spending needs to be done carefully and over time. If we tried to do that all in one budget, for instance, it'd require some dramatic cuts to the public services that New Zealanders rely on and is likely to have an impact on the cost of living as well. So we're taking a balanced approach that reduces our spending while also delivering core public services. I recently got asked in a Prime Ministerial press conference what the price of certain grocery items was. I was able to answer that because I generally tend to do my own supermarket shopping at Pack and Save and Upper Hutt. And I do like to keep a bit of an eye on what New Zealanders are paying at the checkout. Now, I know that I'm very fortunate that when I get to the checkout, I don't have to worry so much about whether or not I'm going to be able to pay for the groceries in my trolley. But I know that for a lot of families at the moment, that's one of their key anxiety points in any given week, is the point where they get to the checkout and they have to work out whether or not they've done their maths right as they've been going around the supermarket, and they're actually going to be able to pay for the groceries that they're seeking to buy. So I think that makes it incumbent on leaders not only to walk in the shoes of others, but to reflect their experiences in the choices that we make. And that means it's not right for households to be tightening their belts if the government isn't also being seen to be doing the same. So I'd call it a no-frills approach that characterises the decisions that we've been making since I became the Prime Minister, and it certainly characterises the decisions that we have taken in this year's budget. You will have seen yesterday that David Parker released the work the IRD have done on the tax that a very small number of high wealth individuals pay in New Zealand. And while that work highlights gaps in the tax treatment of income generated off their assets, I do want to also provide some clarity for you today as well. The government will not be introducing any major new taxes like a wealth tax or a capital gains tax in this budget. We set out our tax policy at the last election, and that is what we're sticking to. And on the point of living within our means, I can also announce today that there will be no new specific taxes or levies in the budget to pay for the recovery from the Auckland floods or from Cyclone Gabrielle. Estimates for the Treasury has put the cost of the asset damage from those recent natural disasters at between $9 billion and $14.5 billion. So that's more than the Kaikoura earthquake, but significantly less than the Canterbury earthquake. But significantly less than the Canterbury earthquake. Half of that total cost estimate relates to public infrastructure. That's assets owned by central and local government, such as our roads. While we know that we need to rebuild quickly and more strongly than we did before, we also know that the rebuild could add inflationary pressures across the economy, particularly in areas like construction. And that means that we've got to strike a careful balance across all of our spending in our approach to the rebuild. So as such, I'm also announcing today that the government's taken the decision to fund the recovery through a combination of the annual operating and capital allowances that we set each year for the budget, through saving and reprioritisation, and through some debt as we invest in infrastructure repairs that help us to build back stronger. So I'd like to say again, there'll be no new taxes or levies to pay for the recovery. If you think of it like this, when you have major repairs done to your house, you usually have to borrow a little bit and cut back on expenses elsewhere to pay for them. Households generally can't just increase their income to pay for repairs, and it's not the right time for the government to do that either. So the upcoming budget will have much more to say about the investments that we're going to be making to rebuild with greater resilience after Cyclone Gabrielle and the flooding, as well as the measures that we are taking to support New Zealanders with the cost of living. But before I wrap up today, I did also want to share some thinking about the economy beyond the immediate challenges that we face. There's no point in getting through the here and now if you don't also have a plan for the future. In broad terms, my plan is for New Zealand to be the best little trading nation in the world. I want our exports, our people, and our way of life to be the envy of everyone else around the world. And meeting this challenge means more than just supporting our exporters and our entrepreneurs, which we undoubtedly will. It also means creating a New Zealand where our young people can reach their potential, where our environment is as clean and green as our marketing suggests, where our communities are safe, our elderly, our young and our disabled are cared for. We can't expect consumers overseas to pay a premium for our goods and services, and we won't attract the world's best talent and capital if we aren't investing in ourselves. So in addition to the cost of living and the cyclone recovery, this budget is also about laying the foundations for achieving that goal by making some targeted investments in the things that will help to achieve improvements in growth and productivity. First off, we have a plan to expand trade opportunities. Next week, I'm travelling to the United Kingdom for the King's coronation. But prior to that, there'll be a focus on securing into entry the UK Free Trade Agreement. There are $1 billion of opportunities associated with that deal alone, and I want to see our exporters getting the benefits from that as soon as possible. And just last weekend, I was in Brisbane with a trade delegation where I held talks with Prime Minister Albanese about the close ties between our country and the huge opportunities that lie ahead in the Trans-Tasman relationship. What was most impressive and encouraging about our conversations was the desire on the part of both of our countries to work together and even more closely to modernise our closer economic relations, or CER, agreement, recognised internationally as the gold standard for international trade agreements. It's the 40th year of CER, and at the upcoming Australia-New Zealand leadership meeting, which will be hosted here in New Zealand, there'll be a big focus on improving Trans-Tasman systems operability and streamlining processes and standards to make the border, innovation and capital investments much more seamless. While markets further afield tend to be dominated by the big players, Australia offers a first stop for a lot of our small and medium businesses entering the export market. And for that reason alone, it's important that we do all we can to continue to boost the benefit that we can get out of the CER relationship. Sustainability and renewable energy are a huge focus for the Australians. Prime Minister Albanese told me he wants Australia to be a renewable superpower, and he envisages great opportunities for New Zealand businesses and startups in research. And I can't emphasise enough the Albanese government and Australia's desire to work with us to our mutual advantage. The relationship between our two countries has really been better than it is now. There is a very pro-Kiwi caucus within the Australian Cabinet. Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill in particular have been very strong advocates for New Zealand. And I spoke to both of them during my visit. My colleague Grant Robertson keeps in regular contact with Treasurer Chalmers. And it's clear that they see us like we see them, as family. A second thing that we need to do as a government is a small number of things very well. And those small number of things need to be focused on growing our economy. As a government, we need to pull right back and ask the question, what things are going to make the biggest difference to New Zealand right now and into the future? What's going to help lift our productivity and wealth so that we can keep investing in things like health and education and the other public services New Zealanders rely on? What are the handful of things that are going to help us to get ahead and to stay ahead? So I think it's worth the business community knowing that for me, my priority in this budget will be driving a focus on skills, on science, and on infrastructure investment, so that we can grow our economy and make it more secure. Those three areas will all receive extra support in this year's budget. We know from looking at advanced economies like Germany, South Korea, Japan, and Singapore that some of the best investments that you can make in the future of your economy are in science, skills, and infrastructure. And so much else flows from that. If we've got the investment in science and strong and resilient infrastructure and the skilled workforce to carry all of that out, then that supports every area of the economy, be it agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, small to medium enterprises. It can make the greatest gains in growth and productivity for the country. As a former Minister of Education, it won't surprise anyone to know that skills has been a particular area of passion of mine. In recent weeks, the government's put in place a range of measures to better support the teaching of maths and literacy. We're adding another 320 teachers, for example, focused on years 4 to 8 of our primary system, where we know that we see a decrease in student outcomes during those years. We've also put on hold a number of the changes that we were making to the NCEA and to the curriculum so that we can focus particularly in on those core areas of literacy and numeracy, which we know are some of our most urgent priorities. I know that skills is a huge issue for business, and it's an area that we want to continue to partner with you. Education is the single biggest way that people can change their lives and the outcomes that they achieve. In New Zealand, it's been the bedrock of our egalitarian society, the greatest equaliser in helping us to provide the same opportunities for both rich and poor. I'm not sure that aspiration always holds true in these days to the extent that it once did, though, which is why our investment in skills and trades training has been such a focus for the government over recent years, and it's going to continue to be as we move forward. Likewise, we know we need to do more in infrastructure. I know that's a massive issue here, particularly in Auckland, around transport, for example. When we came into office, infrastructure spend by government was averaging around about $5 billion a year. And that simply wasn't enough to keep up with the pressure on our infrastructure system and on the level of investment that is required. That explains some of the deficit in our infrastructure that we're experiencing at the moment. So we boosted infrastructure investment in our first 5 years so that it now averages around $9 billion a year. And Treasury's current estimate suggests that infrastructure investment from 2023 to 2027 will be more in the vicinity of $12.5 billion a year. We know we've got a lot of catching up to do, but we are making good progress. Those numbers are also before the cyclone recovery is taken into account, which again is going to boost government investment in infrastructure further. So infrastructure will be a focus in this year's budget, not only due to the ongoing need to build hospitals and schools for a growing population, but also to rebuild and strengthen following the recent disasters that we've experienced. While the primary focus will be on rebuilding the regions that have suffered the most, those recent natural weather events have also made us more aware of the risks in other parts of the country, for example across our transport network. And I bet that there'll be more talk about culverts and Bailey bridges in the coming weeks than there have been in recent times. So in conclusion, this year's budget will be a no-frills budget. It befits the times that we are currently living in. It will be about getting the basics right. There'll be a strong focus on the cost of living and the cyclone recovery, because those are the most important challenges we face as a country right at the moment. We won't be rocking the boat by introducing major new taxes like a wealth or capital gains tax or a cyclone recovery levy in the budget, and I have made that absolutely clear today. And the budget will be about laying the foundations for the future through investment in skills, in science and in infrastructure. I'm really energised by the budget that we're going to be presenting in a few weeks from now. It will create opportunities for the economy, and it will provide relief for Kiwi households. Our job as a government is to provide support, security and hope. This budget will do that, and it is a mission that I look forward to advancing alongside all of you. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. We'll share a mic here. There's about 5 to choose from there, but I think those aren't ours. Thank you very much for those insights. You've whet our appetite for the budget to come, and some interesting confirmations there, which I'm sure we'll all dwell on, and may even form the basis of some interesting and insightful questions. Because we're now at that time where I'll open the floor to anyone who has any questions. You won't have to come and share this mic. Michaela is over there with one of our own. So if you just raise your hand, and Michaela will come over to you and you can ask your question of the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Rachel Barker from Plastics New Zealand here. Can you expand a little on your definition of science and whether that covers research, development and innovation within businesses, please?
Yes, it does cover research. So science, basically, for me, is about the evidence base of what works, what doesn't work, and what we can do better in the future, fundamentally. So it's about using evidence to inform our decision-making, whether that's the decision-making about bringing new products to the market, advances in health science, and so on. So yes, R&D It has been an area of focus for our government. If you look at and this is not new, but it'll be a focus in the budget, but it's actually been a focus over the last 5 years. And the policies that we've put in place, including the R&D tax credit and so on, we actually need to lift our game as a country when it comes to our investment in R&D if we want to stay at the cutting edge of a very, very globally competitive environment.
Afternoon, Prime Minister. I'm Justin Tayumba's Chief Executive at National Road Carriers, so we represent road transport members. Look, top of their list, the two items we keep hearing about is driver shortage, of course, and then the roading network. So very pleasing yesterday, I was just saying to Minister Wood, the announcement on the immigration pathway for truck drivers as a first time, so that's fantastic and will help make a difference. Roading is obviously putting the state of our roading network at the moment, is putting transport operators under huge pressure in terms of massive diverts that they're having to do, detours, etc. Pleasing to hear you talk about the increase in spend in infrastructure, but could you elaborate a little bit more in terms of in the near term what budget provisions will be there for roading, but also in the longer term what changes you think need to happen to get us out of the current hole and actually set us up with the nationwide network we need for the economy and society?
Yeah. It's always difficult to do a pre-budget speech and then try not to talk too much about the specifics of what's in the budget, but if I maybe shared an observation with you on our investment in transport infrastructure over several generations. I think unfortunately we've kind of gone through a bit of a cyclical approach where we either spend money on road maintenance or we spend it on new roads and big shiny new things. And somehow we need to even that out to make sure that we're doing both of those things. There's no question that we need to improve our overall roading infrastructure, and that includes a mix of new roads and significantly improving the roads that we currently have. We've also got to maintain the ones that we've got at the moment. Extreme weather and the impact that that has on our roading network can't be underestimated. There's a lot of debate about potholes, for example, at the moment. Well, we're spending more money than at any time, I think, in recent history on road maintenance projects, resurfacing roads and so on. But the reality is when you have very, very heavy rain, you end up with more potholes. There's a science behind that too, and it's a relatively simple science. Where there's more water, it's got to go somewhere, and ultimately it ends up creating more damage to the road surface. So I think we've got to make sure we're constantly getting the balance right. And then we just have to look at the resilience of some of the roads that we've got. And we've got to sort of not repeat the mistakes of the past. So some of those roads just shouldn't be rebuilt to the way they were previously, because we know that it's only a matter of time before we're going to be back rebuilding them again. And we've got some high profile examples. There's a country, there's a road in the Coromandel, the old road between Palmerston North and the Wairirapa through the gorge, where we've spent so much money over time repairing those roads, and then another natural disaster comes and we start again. And at various points you have to say, no, actually we've got to build, this roading connection is vital, but rebuilding it where it was and how it was isn't going to be the ongoing answer.
Kia ora, Prime Minister. I'm Vanessa Gascoigne. I'm New Zealand Director at Work Sharp and Dome. Thank you so much for your talk. It's great to hear about your priorities and focus areas. I really want to acknowledge the increased investment we saw in Pharmac last year, and that's helped hundreds more New Zealanders access the medicines that they need. I also want to acknowledge a report that came out yesterday which talked around 170,000 New Zealanders that are still missing out on medicines that are on Pharmac's waitlist that are potentially life-saving, and also that it's taking nearly 8 years for funding decisions to be made. I'd love to hear the government's vision to improve that for those patients that can't wait.
Yeah. Obviously, increasing the overall level of funding available to Pharmac has been a priority for the government, and you will see that. But there is enormous pressure on the health budget. We've made such enormous investments in the health system in recent times. And one of the challenges, I think, in health is how you move funding over time away from sort of more towards the prevention rather than the cure end of the spectrum. And so, how do you keep people healthier? And the investment that we make through Pharmac is actually one of the ways that we can do that. So we can keep people out of hospital by providing them with better treatments. But then you still need to treat people when they end up in hospital as well. And I think over time, I would like to see us continuing to try and move as much of our investment as we can into keeping people healthier so that they can live healthier, longer lives and end up spending less time in the hospital system. But it's one of those, I guess, challenges where for a period of time you have to do both. And I think we're sort of in that zone at the moment where we're trying to rebuild our core health network, our hospitals and so on, so that they actually are there to provide the healthcare that people need, whilst also making those investments in the things that keep them out of hospital. You'll know that last year we set out a 2-year budget allocation for the health budget, and so that's still the focus of this budget. It was the investment that we made in last year's budget that will largely characterise the investments in health in this year's budget. But moving to a more predictable funding cycle for the health system, as we've signalled we're going to do, is also part of the answer, so that we can actually make more strategic investment decisions in healthcare. Rather than just 1 year at a time, we can actually start to build the capability and the capacity of the health system. And funding certainty is a really big part of that. Given the proportion of the health system that isn't delivered by government, or healthcare that's not delivered by government but it's funded by government, I think the more we can make those funding horizons a bit more certain and transparent, the more we can encourage a better quality of healthcare.
Kia ora, Prime Minister. Tāmati Norman Tapuinua. I'm the Director of Ramac Industries and Conscious Foods. One of the questions I have is around your plan to expand trade opportunities. I've done work in Papua New Guinea over the last 15 years. They're the same distance as Aussie to us. The CRA doesn't include them, and we're going to have we've got rising cost of food, and we've got a country that can provide significant amounts of that food, but the barriers to entry for those products to market are significant. Is there any plans that the government has to ease some of those restrictions, to make access easier? We've got staffing issues, 9.5 million people with an average age of 20 on our back doorstep. Is there ways that, and they are traditional trading partners for Māori, how can we improve those?
Yeah, sure. In terms of my approach around foreign policy in the brief period that I've been in the job, my priorities initially have been around trade. So we've got a number of things that we want to land successfully. So the UK Free Trade Agreement, the European Union Free Trade Agreement, other commitments that we made around, for example, the CPTPP, and making sure that we're preserving our access as much as we can as, say, the UK joined the CPTPP, for example. That's been a significant undertaking for us to make sure that we don't see the hard-won gains that we've made eroded too much by other parties joining those trade agreements. So trade in that space, landing what we're doing now and making sure that we're landing that well, has been a key focus. Then opportunities for improvement, so things like CER, making sure that we're taking the opportunities to improve the access that we've got through those arrangements. And actually, with regard to Australia, it's not just about access, but it's about ease of doing business as well. So I had a business delegation come with me to Australia, and a lot of the things that we were talking about, they were just really practical, day-to-day things that actually we could work with the Australian government to make it easier for businesses to be doing business on both sides of the Tasman. And I think there's real opportunities for us to explore that. The Pacific absolutely has to be a focus for us internationally. We have such a strong relationship with our Pacific neighbours. It can be a relationship of real mutual benefit. And I think, yes, there are opportunities for us to explore trade barriers, right the way through the Pacific. That's not something that I've had the opportunity to explore in great depth yet, but certainly it would be a priority for the next 3 years in the next term of government. As we also then scan the horizon to look at where the next kind of trade opportunities are for us. We've done very well, I think, in landing the trade deals that we've been focused on over the last 5 years, so CPTPP, the UK, the European Union, upgrade of the trade agreement with China, the various work that we've been doing in the ASEAN region. Now we've got the opportunity to scan, I think, further afield and say, okay, where are the next big challenges?
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Phil Love from Business New Zealand. Thank you for clarifying that there will be no changes to tax policy in the budget. Post-budget, however, it's critical for business that they get clarity on how unrealised gains will be assessed in the future. So as soon as you develop that position, that should be a priority.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm amazed that you were the first person to ask about tax, but Look, I was really clear when I took up the job. We made some commitments back in 2020 for what we would do in the tax space and this term of government. And we're absolutely honouring that. So that commitment continues right up until, until election day. And I've said that, as a party in government, at the moment we're the only party in government, but, potentially either, I'd love to see that continue after the election, but or potentially, a party in another governing arrangement after the election, we'll be very clear what our tax policy is well in advance of the election, so that people will know that, when they go to the ballot box and they know what they're voting for. With elections zooming up fast, so you won't be having to wait very long to get those kind of answers, but they will be post-election commitments rather than pre-election commitments.
Thank you for coming today, Prime Minister. My name is Damien Podreski and I'm with Benty in New Zealand. You've had tax, time for a bit of education. In the short term, two-part question. In the short term, we're looking at possible strikes and disruption in education, which has an impact on children who should not miss another hour in the classroom after in recent years, and let alone business who will be dealing with their children at home when they should be at school. And in the long term, one of the great leading indicators to say that an economy is going to shift is much more positive outcomes in education. What is the government's policy and approach in both those areas?
Yeah. As a recently former Minister of Education, I always find discussing collective bargaining quite difficult. I have some relatively strong views on that, but generally found that sharing them publicly in the middle of bargaining doesn't really go very well. But what I would say is, we are absolutely committed to improving the pay and conditions of our teaching workforce. If the most recent offer that primary school teachers have on the table at the moment that they're currently considering would mean the top of the primary teacher salary scale hits $100,000. So that means someone who's been in teaching as a primary teacher for 10 years would be able to earn in their base pay $100,000. And then of course they can get extra allowances and so on top of that. That actually makes it quite a globally competitive teacher salary for a primary school teacher. Secondary schools, the bargaining process is a bit more complicated there and is taking a little longer. So overall, we want to get teachers back into the classroom and not undertaking industrial action. In terms of the focus within the education system, I think we've got to make sure that our kids have got a good foundational education. So that includes literacy and numeracy, but we've got to deliver that in a way that's engaging for young people. We do see an increasing number of young people over the last 10 years or more disengaging from the education system. And I don't want to see us sort of move to a factory model of education which actually disengages the very kids that we're trying to get back in who aren't currently succeeding in the system. So we've got to make sure that school is a place where they want to be, where they're engaged, where they can't wait to get there in the mornings. Because that's actually how you're going to get the best educational outcome for those kids. It's making sure that they're actually enjoying what it is that they're learning. And the science of learning has actually moved on quite a bit from what it was 50 years ago. So when we think about the 3 R's, reading, writing and arithmetic, we know that the science of learning isn't putting people behind a desk and making them stare at a blackboard for an hour at a time, because actually that's not the way most young people learn. So I think what we've got to do is make sure that we're providing our teachers with the upskilling opportunities so that they can actually draw on the science of learning, so that those foundation skills that unlock everything else are actually available to all of our young people. So that's kind of where the focus for us is. It's got to be. It's got to be on making sure that that schools are a place where kids want to be, that they're getting the foundational skills that they need to become lifelong learners. Because I think that's the other mindset shift that we have to make in the education space overall. The idea that you can front load someone's education and then send them off out into the world at the age of 18 and they're on their way and that's good. That's just not the world we live in anymore. You have to equip people to be lifelong learners. And some of that might be involved re-engaging with the formal education system, but a lot of it's going to involve making sure that our education system embraces and supports in situ learning, so learning whilst you're on the job, learning whilst you're out there doing other things, because those are the lives that people want to lead nowadays. So if we think about vocational education, for example, the idea that people will take 3 or 4 years out of the workforce to go and learn a trade isn't realistic. Most people want to be learning their trade whilst they're on the job and earning money at the same time. So the vocational education reforms that we've got underway at the moment really recognise that. And they recognise that you can gain and be accredited with a lot of the skills you need whilst you're actually doing those things. And there will on occasion be things that you need to do off the job, and we need the system to be able to reorient itself so that the transition between those two things is more seamless. And then at the higher end of the education system, so our universities, for example, I want to make sure that we've got a university system that attracts the best and brightest from around the world to want to come and live and work and research and teach here in New Zealand. So hopefully that covers all the bases. Probably the bit that I did miss one, and that is that I don't think we start our focus early enough. By the time kids start school at the age of 5, the educational disparities that we see persist right the way through the education system are usually already evident. And so the investment we make in early childhood education and in giving those kids the best first 1,000 days actually will have a huge impact on closing the disparities we see through the school system.
Tēnā koe, Prime Minister, ko Trina Tāmata Tukuingoa from Whāriki. If you could help me with my teenagers and getting them into school and liking it, that would be fantastic. Listen, we obviously have, or want to thank you for your immigration focus and setting those skills shortages or correcting those rates. What I'm more focused on is our domestic unemployment rates rising for Māori and Pacifica. Obviously, Māori here in Tāmaki at 8%, Pacifica even higher than that. That's double the European rates of unemployment. We've got a Māori economy that's starting to boom and grow, and obviously a lot of Māori SMEs across the country. What's the focus on trying to close that gap, and is there any focus on Māori business specifically to address the Māori unemployment rates?
Yeah. So I think we should, right at the beginning, acknowledge that some of that is driven by intergenerational factors. So our education system, for example, over a long time has underserved Māori and Pacifica learners. And the income disparity that follows thereafter has some of its roots in the education system. And so making sure that we're continuing to drive that focus on improving the educational outcomes that we're achieving for Māori and Pacifica is important. Similarly, though, in the health system as well, because that actually has an impact. You know, the disparities for Māori and Pacific people in terms of health outcomes has an impact on their lifelong earnings, which again has an impact on the overall economic outcomes that they can achieve. And so driving improvement through the health system to make sure that we're dealing with those health disparities will also have an economic impact on those families too. I think the growing strength of the Māori economy within New Zealand is something that we should really celebrate, but actually there's something in that around, and we saw that just in the most recent trip that I did to Australia over the weekend, there's huge international possibility there as well. There is a real, there's a growing Indigenous economy around the world who are very keen to interact with the Māori economy here in New Zealand, and I think we can continue to explore the opportunities that presents. Perhaps if I go back right to the starting point, the balance around immigration is always going to be a really challenging one for any New Zealand government, and we shouldn't ever allow that debate to be overly simplified. Because yes, we've done some things at the moment that are making it easier for people to come into the country, but we've also got to make sure we get the balance right here so that the population isn't growing so fast that our infrastructure can't keep up, because we've seen that in recent past, and that's created some challenges around not having enough housing and not being able to provide the infrastructure that that many extra people, particularly here in Auckland, actually need in order to enjoy the quality of life that we want to see. And we also need to be mindful of the decisions we're making right now when the labour market's at a particular point in the economic cycle, and make sure that what we're doing is sustainable through the economic cycle, so that if we do see employment numbers starting to change, that we're not displacing people who are currently in work through our immigration settings. So getting that policy balance right will always be a challenge for whomever the government is, and I think we need to constantly be transparent about the fact that we've got to weigh up all of those things in the immigration decisions that we make.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, and thank you everyone for your questions. I will just ask Andrew Hunt, the Chair of the EMA, just to formally thank you and sum up. So, Andrew, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come and speak to our members, Prime Minister. We can only imagine the workload you have got in front of you with the challenges that the country's got. I think businesses will be pleased to hear there's a no-frills budget coming. That's sort of the life that we all live at the moment in our businesses is no frills, and it's good to hear the government is on the same page. We understand this budget's a challenge. You've got these cost of living pressures and you want to support New Zealanders, but you want to do so without fueling the inflation fire. And we certainly understand that challenge. We also appreciate you putting your time and effort into the business sector, and thank you. That's very, very welcome. Business is hard, Prime Minister. Business is really, really challenging at the moment. We've just been through, in my career, the most difficult period I can recall through, obviously, COVID. And a lot of our members are privately owned businesses. They've leaned in, they've sacrificed for themselves and their families to support their colleagues, their workers. They have often gone to the bank, borrowed some more money, consumed reserves on their balance sheets that have taken years to build up in order to get through the last 2 or 3 years. And they're looking to try and recover, and that recovery is going to take quite a long time. We know the government's facing similar pressures, but from a business point of view, we really understand that, and so businesses are looking for some support. Those cost of living pressures, there's cost of business pressure as well, and you mentioned skills, and again, we acknowledge the work that's going on, and we appreciate that. Every time we have a member meeting and we say, what's the number one problem you've got? It's always skills and the skill shortage, and it's not a quick fix, but we certainly need it to be fixed, as immigration settings are important. Workplace flexibility is another issue that's really important to our members. We know that we need increasingly to have relationships with our workers that allow us to accommodate their needs, and so we would stand against anything that creates rigidity, and so that's why things like the fair pay agreements, which we're starting to see emerge, we don't think those are a welcome addition to the landscape, and we'd encourage you to look at those and see what we can do to ensure that they don't go too far, because our businesses need to be able to react to this new, nimble and agile environment that we find ourselves in. Just over the last couple of days, I've witnessed a little bit of retail crime just in my normal going about day-to-day business around here in Newmarket and nearby. And I was shocked to see it, to be honest. I think many of us, though, are experiencing that on a more regular basis. And some of those are creating costs for business, and therefore costs for consumers, as security guards and all of the various other things that are required, the stock leakage and whatever, end up being reflected in the prices, and that won't be helping that inflationary pressure, the cost of living challenge either. So we really do understand that this budget is going to have to be one that is focused on disciplined government expenditure and making sure that you don't do anything to fuel that inflation fire, but instead work on anything that will lift productivity and help New Zealand to be a place that's wonderful to live in, to raise a family, to invest in a business and to invest your time in. So Prime Minister, thank you for what you had to say. We appreciate it. Wish you well. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Last you'll hear from me, I promise. I think the Prime Minister does have to leave very soon, but happily, in the Prime Minister's place, there will be some dessert coming out, and feel free to indulge in that, and also some networking. There's a room full of very interesting and insightful people here, so take advantage of that. And I can see dessert's on its way, so thank you again for coming here, and please enjoy it. Thank you.